So I was a daily listener to Johnny and Friends way back when I don't know, I was probably 25, 26 years old at that time. And so I was very familiar with her story. Well, last year you came walking down the aisle here at the NRB, and one of our good friends, Russ, our station manager out in Salt Lake City, grabbed hold of you and like he knew you forever, and I don't know whether he did or didn't, but he said, "Hey, Ken, I want to introduce you to my friend Darren Kuhn." And you looked at my shirt that said Masculine Journey Radio, and you said, Masculine Journey Radio, that's interesting. Let me tell you about what I do. And I had no clue what it was that you were talking about at the time. And then you began to talk to us about, in fact, I think your first question out of your mouth was, have you ever read Wild at Heart? and I had to laugh, and my best friend Sam was standing there next to me, and we're partners in this ministry, and as well as Mark Varner and Todd Clark and a bunch of other guys that help us. But I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have read Wild at Heart. And you started telling me about the boot camps that you guys have done, or the fly fishing adventures.
Well,
you guys don't necessarily call them a boot camp.
I think we've had the Mutual Admiration Society of John's books and how Jesus has worked through Wild at Heart
Right.
into the lives of men. And, unbeknownst to myself, I was given that book in the early 2000s.
I was too. I
from
put
a
off
friend.
reading it for about 3 or 4 years.
And I read it. I wasn't all that keen about it. I thought it was a great book, but it didn't really resonate for me.
Right.
And this friend of mine kept on asking me, "Hey, why don't you come fly fishing with me?" Because he just bought a ranch up in Montana, and I said, I don't want to. I did a lot of ocean fishing, and it was my wife. It was Johnny who said, maybe you ought to go. And so I said, well, okay. He said, great. I called him up. He said, great. Reread that book, because we're going to use that for our time of discussion. And this was 2003. And when I went up there, Jan had invited 8 guys, and the 9th guy was John Eldridge. He took us through that book.
Yeah.
It made all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
An adventure to live, a beauty to rescue, and a battle to fight. I mean, when I asked John, he says, well, it's all based on the gospel. And he went and took us through it. And it was that year that I was retiring, so it meant a lot more as he took us through it, that the realization for me that there really is a battle going on.
Right.
And when you talk to the guys at Ransom Heart, which is John's ministry, and you say, well, can you narrow this down a little bit? Can you tell us what this is all about? I said, sure. There's a battle going on. The battle's for your heart. More than likely, you've taken a wound to the heart, and more than likely, that wound has come from your father. Mm-hmm. And, I have to tell you, Darren, it changed my whole life. And Johnny saw a different person coming back, realized that this was a real positive change.
Right.
And she's been a big support in me doing this from all those years back, from the early 2000s till now.
Well, last year when Johnny got up on stage on Tuesday night and began to speak and began to talk about your story together and referencing the book, Johnny and Ken, an Untold Love Story, which I'm sure every man in the world is running out to buy that book, because they want to read all about the love story, right? Well, she began talking about that, and I had just met you the day before. And she began to talk about some of the difficulties in your marriage and some of the dark places that you two had been together and survived. But as she began to talk about the days leading into her battle with breast cancer, your battle with breast cancer that Johnny had, and the way that your heart rose to the occasion, Sam and I sat there literally in tears. I think we might have been the only guys at our table that were sitting there crying, but we both knew exactly what had happened. Because we've walked that journey as well, and we knew what was going on in your heart, in your mind, and the joy that Johnny was experiencing as a man was rising up. And here's the deal. Ken Tada's not a passive guy. You weren't a passive guy really, before you read Wild at Heart. I mean, you were a football coach, a high school football coach. You're a man's man.
I taught high school for 32 years, and I coached football, and I love the outdoors. I've got to tell you this story, though, Darren.
Go ahead.
It goes along with our Wild at Heart adventures. when John took us through for the first time that week, he said, just go out this afternoon when you're going fly fishing, and just see if you can have a conversation with God. Hear what God has to say to your heart. Well, I got to tell you, I came back. I mean, I went out. I didn't hear a thing. I came back. I told John, I'm so embarrassed, but I didn't hear a thing.
Yeah.
And he laughed and he said, "Oh, yeah, And then we kind of left it at that. And then a couple years later, when Jan and I were leading a group of guys, Jan gave us the same exercise. He said, go on out this afternoon and listen to see what God has to say to your heart. And I can tell you exactly where I was. I was up on this dam, and there was a rock I sat on, and I heard God clearly say to me, Johnny's the most important gift I've given you. You take care of her. I thought, where's this coming from?
Yeah.
It just was so clear, and yet it was so out of the blue.
Right.
And 2010, as you pointed out, Johnny was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I realized for the first time I may lose my best friend. We didn't know how bad this was going to be. Fortunately, she's 3 years in remission of the cancer, but I remembered what God had told me. And it kind of all came together, because I realized that God had given me the responsibility of taking care of my wife. And what an awesome privilege.
Well, it is. And I have been reading the book. I've not finished it yet, but I've read through about halfway through it. And I want to ask you, one of the things you talked about at one of these Wild at Heart adventures was the concept of the new name, and that you had walked most of your life not really realizing perhaps the way God saw you, your truest identity in Christ, if you will. And talk about that, if you don't mind, how that came about for you.
Well, again, it was kind of unusual for me to think about what was my name. Well, I knew my name. It's Ken Tada, And I, after one of these trips, I came home, and we had some friends who were here for some time from China. And the gentleman asked me, he said, well, do you have a Japanese name? And I thought to myself, yeah, I do. My Japanese name is Takeshi. And it's funny because I haven't used that for years and years. I was embarrassed by it because the literal translation for Takeshi in Japanese is warrior. It's samurai.
Yes.
And my last name, Tada, in Japanese, or in English translation, is fields, rice fields. So the kids were merciless when I was growing up. When they found out what my name was and what it stood for, they used to call me Brave Knight of the Rice Fields.
Oh.
And so as a little child, I just kind of put it in the back shelf, and I never even thought about it. And then, when he asked that question, I realized all that week prior, that we were talking about what's your name, that I've always had my name. And the name that God has given me is warrior. And I just want to finish well and be a warrior for God. So
isn't it amazing how the enemy, though, was assaulting that identity, assaulting that name, even from, we talk to guys all the time, I'm sure you and Jan do as well, that, the enemy starts his assault very early in life, especially on masculinity and on your identity in Christ, and that this new name is probably not something new about you. It's actually probably something old about you. It's the original intent of God in Ken Tada. And so isn't it amazing how the enemy comes at you, though, with the warfare that made you think that name was not a good name?
Oh, yeah. John talks in Wild at Heart about the way the enemy will come at you with the 3 different ways, and he'll make a deal with you, and he'll try to cover these things. Yeah, exactly, Darren. I think that oftentimes, we just need to stop and realize the enemy is very shrewd, And if he's shrewd and we got a battle going on, he's out there trying to get to you in different ways. So recognizing it is a good part of the battle, or at least a good defensive measure in
Right.
fighting off what the enemy has intended for us.
So if you could talk to guys right now, which obviously you are, actually we probably have more women listeners than men, but they always go home and tell their husband, hey, you need to go listen to this show, or you need to go download these podcasts, or you need to go to that boot camp they're doing. That's oddly enough, that's what we hear from a lot of men. Hey, how'd you hear about
But,
us?
someday, I'd like to attend your boot camp.
We would love for you to come. If you want to commit to coming right now, I'll buy the plane ticket. We would love for you to come. We've got one coming up March 28th through the 30th of this year, and it's a really cool little place. Are you familiar with Jack Dempsey? I know you're a history buff.
I'm familiar with Jack
Dempsey, the boxer.
Sure.
Well, he built a training facility in Providence, North Carolina, built a gym, and had a speakeasy underneath it, because back in the days, that's kind of the way those things happened, and those two cultures ran side by side. We do our boot camps at Jack Dempsey's original training gym, and it still looks very rustic the way, it's a whole Christian camp there, but the place where we meet, there's a nicer place to meet. We meet in Jack Dempsey's gym because there's a feel to it that guys walk in and they go, this is a man's place. This is a guy's place to be. And we do it there, and you can still kind of feel the past there, if you will, the exposed beams and just rustic, manly man type of place.
Do you find, Darren, even in North Carolina in the Jack Dempsey gym, that guys are wanting to talk to each other? They just don't have an avenue to be able to do that?
Yeah, and that's when the poser comes out, obviously, is hey, this is my job, this is who I am, and, 2.2 kids and a wife, and I did this for a career and all those things, and that's fine, but yeah, guys they want intimacy, they're craving intimacy, and that's why they're finding it on the internet with some lady that's not their wife, or sometimes they find it, on the golf course or out on a fishing boat or whatever, and God wants that for us. But what we also find out is that so many men are willing to kind of talk around the water cooler. Hey, Ken, I'm struggling with this idea with my wife, and what do you think about that? And that's great. And what we do obviously helps that happen more.
Right.
But the one thing they seldom do is go out in the woods and say, God, I know what all my buddies have said about this, but what do you say about this?
Exactly.
What do you think about me? When you call Ken Tada, when you say to the angels in heaven, hey, I need you to go help Ken and Johnny today, what do you refer to me as? Is it Ken Tada, or is it something else? And we seldom do that in our society. We don't make the time for it, and so that's a really important part of the boot camps, obviously, is giving guys the time.
And do you find, too, Darren, that, you got to take guys out of their comfort zone?
Yes.
You sit out in the woods. Montana, if we try to do this in a hotel in Southern California, I don't think it would have the same impact. You got to get guys into an area where you can, experience God's creation. Mm-hmm. You can look around, and the one thing, we actually have two rules up in Montana, only two rules. One is, whatever we say here stays here.
Right.
And the other one is, we're not trying to change anybody. So, it's so easy to hear somebody's story across the table and say, I know what that guy needs.
Yes.
And then go up and say, hey, listen, I heard your story, and this is what you should do. No. We don't try to do that.
Right.
We try to avoid and actually tell other guys, that's not something we do here.
And we do the same thing. We talk to guys. We set the groundwork right away. Look, you have to unplug. Put your cell phone in the trunk, lock it up, do whatever you got to do. Unplug from the world. Don't try to give advice to everybody else. And you have our permission to reject the advice of someone if you want to, if they offer it to you. What we're looking for is what God thinks. And what we have found is that when we get up and are vulnerable about our story, I was married for 23 years. I pastored 3 churches. I had an addiction to pornography through a good part of that. And my wife handled that sort of rejection by having multiple affairs. Well, guess what my wound is?
Yeah.
It's rejection and shame and abandonment. And I lived a life that created that in ultimate. And so when I get up and I talk about that and be real about the healing, not just life is bad, oh boy, tough it out, suck it up, come on, you can do this. But yes, life has hurt. There are wounds. You allude to some father wounds in the book, but you don't go super deep into that.
I asked John about that once, and fortunately, I've had a chance an opportunity over the years to spend a little time with him, and I've asked him about wounds and father wounds, and yes, more than likely, guys have taken a father wound, but there are all kinds of wounds.
Right.
You can take a mother wound, and one of the things I discovered early on is, yes, I can attribute some of the wounds that I have to my father. One of the things was validation.
Mm-hmm.
I always sought validation through my dad or my mom, my parents. It's a cultural thing with the Japanese, especially the years that I grew up was after the war. And, one of the things we were taught as Japanese children was to make your families proud.
Right.
So what I would do is I would try to do better than the next person. Playing football or being a student body officer or, excelling in academics or whatever it may be, that validation was more or less focused on my parents. And then, of course, John talks about our validation through Eve. But I think where I came, around full circle was realizing that my true validation, my real validation comes through God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally got to that point, it was like, wow. It gave me peace about a lot of other things, and that whole thing about getting peace from our wound or finding out what our wounds are and being able to identify them so we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely 100% true.
And other men can help lead you to that place, but
Exactly.
they can't heal it for you, and they can't ultimately take you all the way there. We can walk together on the journey, but God's got to be the one to take us to that healing place.
Jan and I have said often up in Montana, all we're trying to do is set the table for the rest of these guys.
Right.
But unless God comes and visits us,
Yes.
it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's just another retreat.
And usually the second or the third day is when we see this turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that John says in his book is you don't know a man until you know his story.
Yes.
So we give each guy, unfortunately, time is everything because we have to time things, but
Right.
we give each guy at least a half an hour to tell their story. And they go through, and we try to relate it to the book, but they get that half hour. And it's amazing how much you don't know about the guy sitting across the table from you having dinner until you actually hear his story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, yes, I understand what he's going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a huge part of what we do up in Montana, being able to hear guys' stories for the first time, for some of them to be able to share their stories and not to feel intimidated that like somebody's going to, give them advice or look down upon them. And I have seen, as you probably have too, Darren, in your ministry, guys' lives completely change.
Oh, yeah.
So
We have men here at the NRB who were separated from their wives when we met them. Life was falling apart. And after going to a boot camp, after understanding some of these principles and walking alongside of us for a while, those marriages are restored. We've seen marriages saved in our own ministry organization. No marriage is off limits to Satan, and we live life too, and we have wounds. And one of the things that I want to recommend to our listeners is men, go get the book, Joni and Ken, An Untold Love Story. You're going to love it as a man because it's as I'm reading it, I am getting to know more about Johnny's story that I didn't know. Johnny is so authentic, first of all, and shares her heart, shares a woman's heart in such an authentic way that I think every man can benefit from that. But then listening to how God moved through you, with you, in spite of you at times, in spite of Johnny at times, that's just an amazing story, and I want to recommend to guys to do that. If a guy wants to go to Montana, you guys have a list of like 7 miles long waiting list or what?
There are 9 camps, or 9 of these that we do during the summer, and the easiest way to find out which ones are still available is to go to our website, twa.us.
Okay.
So it's twa.us, and there's some videos, there's some testimonials, there's some other things there, good stuff. And if they can't get that, they're certainly welcome to call me.
Okay.
And
well, we'll put that on our website
okay.
as well, and we'll list you guys as an ally of ours, and we would love to have you back on Masculine Journey as often as you're willing to call in. We'll let you call in. We don't have to meet in Nashville to do that, but
well, Darren, I feel like there's a mutual admiration society going on right here, and I love you guys.
Well, we love what you guys are doing,
and
too.
in all the best ways. And I would pray that God would work through your ministry and touch the lives of guys out here, because you know what? We don't have a exclusive on touching men's lives.
No.
We need this ministry.
Yeah.
And so, our prayers are going to be with you and for all the things that you guys do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. I love you guys. Really do. Love you and Johnny both. And it's just so exciting to know that our stories parallel in a lot of ways, and to know that your heart, Jan's heart, others, John's heart is for these things, and to know there are other people around the world. It's kind of like Peter said to his disciples, know that your brothers and sisters around the kingdom are going through these same things. And this is the time, I believe, that the Father is restoring the hearts of men. And so I think we're playing a critical time in the kingdom.
Amen to that.
And I definitely want to be on board for that and on the front lines as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
God bless you.